us preparing to live stream the webinar. Oh. Is it?
Okay. And then you don't want to hit start for live stream. You just want to, so go ahead and hit pause because we're on YouTube right now talking. It's okay. Good. I just want to make sure it's saved in there. So now, Jenny, go ahead. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Call to order this meeting of the Bend Metropolitan Planning Organization. And why don't we go ahead and go around, and how about this? I'll call on you and you will tell me the transportation project you are the most excited about. I'm going to start with Bob Townsend.
Bob Townsend, Central Oregon Area Manager, and I have like 10 of them, but I'd like the Dalles Bridge deck replacement to get done and go well because it's been very problematic. But the North Corridor and US 20, I know they're two different projects there, but those are my top priorities, and Ward Hamby getting done too. So sorry, that's 4, but
that's okay. And what was the first one, Bob? Did you say the Dalles?
Yeah, we're doing a bridge deck replacement across the Columbia and the Dalles, and it has closures Thursday through Sunday night every week for about 8 months, and so it's very traumatic for our crews and things. So I'll be very happy when that one is done.
Got it. Thank you, Rita.
Hi, everyone. This is a little bit very centered on Bend, but I live really close to all of the Newport construction. So I'm very excited for us to continue working on Newport, and that one day we can smoothly drive up and down Newport and people can stop speeding down Portland.
And I can stop avoiding the west side. Like, I don't know how to get there. I don't know what else, right? I'm not kidding. Yeah, that's an excellent one, Rita. Thank you very much. Yeah. Let's see. Have we got Phil with, there's
Yes.
Megan.
Yep.
Megan, you want to go? Introduce yourself and tell us about the transportation project you're most excited about.
Well, Rita took mine. So, I mean, I'm going to give you like the politician answer here. And like, basically, I am excited about all the projects that make it easier for everybody to get around town. Because that has become quite the experience for all of us, whether we're walking, biking, or in a car. So I am just excited that things are happening. And yeah, that's all.
Thanks so much. And there's Phil. Hi, Phil. Will you introduce yourself and tell us the transportation project you're most excited about?
Hey, everyone. Phil Chang, Deschutes County Commissioner. To go to the very north margin of the MPO area, I'm really excited about work that is coming up soon in Tumalo. So that Cook Road intersection with the highway is getting a roundabout, and that is going to be very exciting and is going to dramatically improve public safety or traffic safety in that area. And along with that project, people may or may not have heard, but there will also be a bike head tunnel that goes under the highway and kind of bridges the two sides of Tumalo, so that we'll have better pedestrian and bike connectivity in that community.
Thank you so much, Phil. You took the one I was thinking about. Yes, that one is so important. My name is Barb Campbell, and I serve on the Bend City Council in addition to being the chair of the MPO. And since Phil mentions the one in Tumalo, I will mention the Ward Hamby intersection. I'll go out to kind of the eastern edge of the MPO, which is another intersection which has just been so dangerous. There have been fatalities. So I'm really excited about that intersection and the fact that we on the MPO were really instrumental in getting that done and done as quickly as it's going to be done. Thanks, everybody. Thank you so much. We have the Bend MPO staff with us. We've got Tyler Deakey, who's the manager, and Andrea Napoli, who's a senior planner, and Hovey Anderson, who is our program coordinator. Hovey, are there any staff people you would like to introduce right now?
Yeah, we have a good turnout today. So
I saw that.
yeah. So Cameron Prow, Typewrite 2, is our recorder. She is on board today. Chris Doty is here from Deschutes County Road Department. Chris Taylor with the City of Bend Finance to do our budget amendment if you have any technical questions. David Abbas, City of Bend Streets Director. I know there's a better name for that. Sorry, David. David Amaton, ODOT Region 4 Planning Manager. Gary Vodden, City of Bend Citizen. Kim Curley, Communications Outreach Coordinator for Commute Options. Let's see here, Rick Williams, ODOT. I'm going to say Senior Planner, but I know there's something else there. Rory Rowan, City of Bend Engineering, and Stacy Stemich, who's going to talk about an event coming up. And I think that's it. Yep, that's everybody.
Excellent.
I know, Doreen Ty just popped in again. She's a visitor, or they are a visitor of the, so I don't know much about them. And then I know Greg Bryant's trying to get on right now, so he should be on in a minute once he gets the passcode right. He's our technical advisory committee member. So
Excellent.
that is everyone now.
That's great. Thank you so much. Thanks everyone for being here today. And that will just send us right over to the second agenda item, which is also Hovey. And Hovey will just talk to us about the meeting guidelines.
Okay. Yes, please raise your hand at any point in this meeting. Once we get to a break, we'll be able to get your message. That includes public members as well. I don't see anybody on the phone, but if you ever are on the phone, that *9 helps you raise your hand or lower it. The meeting is recorded and also on YouTube. And, you know, if we mute you, please know that you can be unmuted. Just use that bottom left option where it shows mute and unmute. That's it. So I think we're all pretty good at this now. Next slide.
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks, Hovey. Next is public comment. Have we got any members of the public who would like to speak now? If so, please try and raise your virtual hand or your physical hand.
Yeah, I don't see any public comment notifications at this point.
I don't either. And we can take time at the end for public comment if there's anyone who wants to. So we'll move right along to the meeting minutes. I would be happy to entertain a motion for the approval of the September 21st meeting minutes.
I move to approve the minutes.
I'll second.
Thank you. We've got a motion from Councillor Schenkelberg and a second from Councillor Perkins. All in favor, please raise your hands. Say aye. That's unanimous. Thank you, everyone. That moves us on to agenda item number 5, which is a 2021-2022 budget adjustment. And Hovey will take us through this item.
All right. So the Bend MPO received a safety division grant for $90 continue the transportation safety work that we did last year, and that resulted in that summit that was done in September, as well as the survey that was community-wide also in September. So we're here to ask you to amend our budget to receive these funds and the in-kind match funding as well. That would be from the city of Bend, Deschutes County, and others within the Central Oregon region. The major deliverables for this group is to implement the safety communication plans that we did a draft of last year, form a regional safety committee, and seek long-term sustainable funding for a safety advocate or a safety program. It's not necessarily a person, but transportation safety program within the Central Oregon or within Deschutes County, depending on how the funding falls through. So if you want to know more about this project, please visit bendoregon.com/transportation safety, or we have another fancy one, centraloregonsafetravels.org, which will come up in a little bit. So what we're asking for today is the policy board to amend our budget to add this revenue and the in-kind match requirement to our budget. So on the next slide, you'll see what that looks like as far as a motion. In the packet, you can see a little bit more information in the issue summary, and also a copy of the resolution. So is there any questions on this project, which we will go into more detail in an informational item. I think it's agenda item 7 coming up. But any questions on this process, or Chris Taylor from City of Bend Finance, anything I missed while speaking about this project? Nope, I don't see anything. All right. So I would just ask if there is a motion to receive these funds into our MPO budget for this fiscal year.
And move approval of the proposed Bend MPO supplemental budget for fiscal year 2021-22 by way of resolution 2021-05.
Second.
Thank you. We've got a motion from Commissioner Chang and a second from Councilor Schenkelberg. Is there any discussion on this matter? Seeing none, all in favor, please raise your hands. And that's unanimous. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
You bet. Thank you, Hovey. Number 6 is MPO sponsorship of Building a Better Bend lecture. And Tyler is going to introduce this with Stacy Stemmuck. I'm sorry, Stacy. I'm sure I didn't say your name right.
All right, I'll jump in. And so I'll let Stacy, you need to introduce yourself and then just talk to this a little bit about building a better Bend in this upcoming lecture. And then I have a couple of slides that I'll share with the board.
Okay, yeah, sounds good. My name is Stacy Stemich. I'm an architect here in town, and I'm also the chair of the nonprofit Building a Better Bend. I think a lot of you are familiar with the lectures that we've brought to town over the years. And this year, we were able to get Charles Marone, the founder and president of Strong Towns, another nonprofit that's focused on the improvement of communities around the country. Just a little bit about Building a Better Bend. We are a nonprofit here in town, and we focus on bringing speakers and matter subject experts from around the country to Bend to talk about topics that are pertinent to what's going on here in Bend. So we don't have them talk specifically about issues that are happening in Bend directly, but we have them talk about things that have been taking place in other communities that are applicable to things that are happening in Bend, so that the decision makers, council commissioners and other people, stakeholders in the community can learn other perspectives. Strong Towns is a nonprofit, and they focus on a new way of thinking about how we build and improve our communities. They are sort of proposing a new metric for successful communities that shifts away from sort of metrics of efficiency, like number of cars per hour on streets and things like that, to more of community resiliency, focusing on small incremental steps of community improvement instead of big, huge, irreversible projects, and that kind of trend. They have a fantastic website, which is strongtowns.org, and Charles Marone, or Chuck Marone as he's known, will be coming to Bend on November 8th at the Tower Theater, and we are looking for sponsorship from a number of different entities to help make this lecture possible.
All right, thank you very much, Stacy. So board members, I just have a couple of other slides I'll share. And so we were approached by a different Building a Better Bend board member about potentially sponsoring, this lecture. And so I think this is the first time I think we've been asked to sponsor something like this. And so we were like, well, what do we do? And so we reached out, Andrea reached out to some of the other MPOs in Oregon to see what they do. Do they have a policy or a process for these type of things? And what we found out, or what she found out, was that most of the other MPOs do occasionally sponsor these type of events. They don't have a specific process. There's usually just a request to the board, and then the discussion trying to show how it ties to MPO efforts or goals or processes. For us, Andrea looked into our work program and our public participation plan and found pretty good, I think, direct ties into our annual work program as well as our ongoing outreach efforts. And so what's being asked of us today is, would the MPO be interested in being what's called a partner sponsor? The cost of that is $500. The slide here just shows some of the things. I mean, if you sponsor, here's what we would get from that. The MPO logo would be shown in some of the outreach materials. The MPO would be recognized at the beginning of the presentation or the lecture. And we'd also be verbally recognized. And then we would also get 2 seats or 2 tickets for the lecture. Is there anything else that you want to share about sponsorship, Stacy?
Sure, yeah, and I can cover just a little bit about what Chuck is going to be talking about as well, and specifically he's going to be talking about transportation issues for towns. He's got a new book coming out, and it's called Confessions of a Recovering Engineer: Transportation for a Strong Town, and it's based around the costs of developing our transportation systems and seeing how there might be other opportunities to improve how people get around our communities. And that's pretty much what he's going to be talking about during this lecture. And so that's how we felt it might fit perfectly in with the MPO's goals.
So that's our last, that's what we have. That's our last slide. And I guess, are there any questions? Do the board members have any questions or comments they'd like to share or have of us?
I'm just enthusiastically pro this sponsorship. I think it ties in perfectly with MPO. It's an awesome get for our community and something that we can all learn from. So I am 2 thumbs up.
Phil, I see you have your hand up.
Yeah, I'm excited about this presentation, this topic, this speaker as well. And I think that partnering with Building a Better Bend is a great thing to do. I'm just trying, that question of, do we do sponsorships, and what do other MPOs do? you know, the question that comes to mind for me is how do we pay for it? Is I think important to explore a little bit. And I just want to get a better understanding of, you know, this seems like an unrestricted funding kind of request. Like they, you know, we couldn't take, you know, like a planning or a specific project grant and cut $500,000 or sorry, $500 out of that. So I'm wondering, like, how much of that unrestricted funding we have to consider doing sponsorships like this, if you know, if we open the door by sponsoring this one.
Great question. And I think, Andrea, do you have anything that you'd like to share before I talk?
Well, I can't necessarily speak to the, looking at specific funds that could be dedicated towards this, but when I reached out to all the other MPOs in the state except for Metro, because they're a bit different. They all generally did various kinds of sponsorship, whether it be for something like this, like something more related to an educational sponsorship or an event sponsorship, but none had an actual process where, there was funds specifically dedicated towards it or some type of application process for it. It was all pretty just, requests to the board. So if we wanted to look, but we could certainly look into creating a little more formal process for this, because, as you mentioned, we're opening the door to this. So do we want to have some parameters around it, or at least some guidance or a process around it? We could look into putting something like that together. But looking at other MPOs, they don't. It's simply a request made to the board, and they look to see to try to tie it to goals of the MPO or something to do with their public outreach processes, or tasks outlined in their work program.
Well, I'm as I'm asking this, I want everyone to understand. Like, I actually think the idea of these sponsorships, these connections with these other groups that are focused on transportation issues in our community is really exciting. Like, I think it's a great thing for the MPO to do. I guess, short of, like my last question was, well, how much money do we have to work with to do this? I guess like another way to phrase the question would be, could we absorb, $3,000-$4,000 worth of sponsorships a year without impacting the work of the MPO and the activities of the staff and I guess how much could we accommodate without having having impacts on the work of the MPO?
Well, we do have, Hobie, maybe you could speak to that, because we do have we do have funds in reserve. The exact dollar amount, I'm not sure.
I can talk. Our adopted budget has $2,000 in community education and outreach. Typically, we use that for in-person meetings when we're all meeting together and we have, additional services or a light fare or some food or something during a lunch meeting. So we do have reserves of about $1,200 that we have not used historically because of COVID remote meetings. So we have some savings this fiscal year. So I would say easily $1,200, and then we could explore more as we do more budgeting. But we do have reserves as well. But in the line item, we have, I'd say $1,200.
Great, that's great to know.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, Phil. Those just excellent questions. Are there any more questions of Tyler or Hovey? I will say that again, I think Phil was asking excellent questions. I can tell you that having served on the Bend City Council for 7 years, that even on the Bend City Council, requests for sponsorship are really rare. We actually do have a budget item to be able to say yes. And with the City of Bend, most of those requests have to do with parades. Having said that, I just completely agree with Megan. I think that this particular this event we're talking about is just fits exactly into our wheelhouse and is well worth the $500. The other thing I was thinking that I noticed immediately is that this event will be free. That is so important to me. There was one time when the City of Bend sponsored an event at the Tower Theater and tickets were still $15 a piece. I was really quite disheartened to find out that tickets were still. So this event is free. There are 450 seats in the tower. So it's kind of like we're just helping everyone with a $1 contribution so that this event can be free. I think that Phil's comments, those are just excellent comments, Phil. And how about if we continue with this one as just a single one-off thing? And if this does open some sort of a floodgate, and if we start to get more, then I absolutely think maybe we should go ahead and set up a fund and decide in advance how much money we have and do a process. But for now, this is the only one that Bend MPO has ever gotten. So it looks to me like we may have support for this. Sounds like we're ready for a motion. If someone would like to make a motion.
I move approval of MPO sponsorship of the November 8th, 2021 Building a Better Bend lecture.
I'll second.
Thank you. We have a motion from Councillor Perkins and a second from Commissioner Chang. All in favor, please raise your hands. Excellent. That is unanimous. And I can tell you, I'm really excited about this. I just think this is going to be a really excellent event and presentation.
Great,
Excellent.
thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Stacy.
Yeah, thank you, Stacy. Thanks for coming to talk to us about this. All right, the next item is number 7. It's an informational item about the US 97 North Corridor Project Trail Crossing Study. And Rory Rowan from the City of Bend is here to talk to us about this one.
Hey, Rory.
Tyler, you gonna do an introduction for me?
Yeah, so Rory is he works for the City of Bend in the Engineering and Infrastructure Planning Division. He has been engaged in a lot of different projects over the years for the city. And I think the one thing that I would just say one of the things he's really worked on, he has led a lot of the bike ped project work, the small things that you see happening to help make our bicycle and pedestrian systems better. He's led a lot of those efforts for the city over the last 5+ years. One of the projects he's working on now is looking at a trail crossing study that would be affiliated or aligned with the US 97 North Corridor project. And so with that, I will let Rory jump in and talk about what is planned up there.
Thank you, Tyler. And thanks for having me. It's good to see you all. Typically presenting to council, but good to be here at the policy board. So appreciate having me today. I understand there's quite a bit of interest in a lot of things related to active transportation, and in this case, how it relates to the Bend North Corridor project on our north end of town. So as Tyler mentioned, my role at the City of Bend with our engineering department, I'm a capital projects manager. So I manage, typically the city's projects where we build. We're responsible for designing and building our own infrastructure. In this case, the Bend North Corridor project with US 97 and some components on US 20. That is an Oregon Department of Transportation, an ODOT-led project. However, the city is contributing some funding to that large, sort of multi-agency project. But kind of what we're going to be talking about today is a portion of that, a component that's been discussed over the years, and kind of some recent and ongoing efforts related to that. So go ahead and go to the next slide. So a little bit of history. So kind of dating back, a large project like this that has a significant amount of federal funding as well as state, and as I mentioned, some local funding on it. An environmental impact study, had to be done to that to kind of see, what all the components would be for that. Different alternatives were considered. So, ODOT, they undertook that process with engineering consultants. That occurred, several years ago, approximately of the 2009 to 2014 timeframe. And as I mentioned, they looked at different kind of alternatives and concepts that could be considered for infrastructure improvements in that area. And there was a record of decision that was made. Federal Highway Administration, ultimately, they provided that record of decision. And that's a large record of decision. Had a lot of components to it. I just pulled out kind of an excerpt from that that's related to a trail undercrossing, a multimodal trail undercrossing in the corridor that was kind of considered at that time. It was included in the project. And what I have on the right is from that large kind of report and the alternative that was selected at that time. And things we'll show you in another slide, things have sort of changed since then, as happens with these large kind of multi-year projects. At that time, a trail kind of undercrossing was shown of the proposed new 97 alignment. However, as I mentioned, things do change. And over the past 2 years or so, the project was kind of reevaluated, and there was a reevaluation report sort of done, submitted to Federal Highway. So an entire new environmental study was not necessarily needed in this case due to some of the changes made. And the trail undercrossing was kind of removed. Some different reasons there. Some of it kind of had to do with timing of sort of improvements in the area, things related to perhaps the Empire Interchange improvements that were kind of thought of at the time or not known exactly when timing might have been, as well as kind of overall uncertainty with the city of Bend's own sort of local active transportation sort of system in the kind of Boyd Acres neighborhood to the east. And so ultimately, what kind of happened over the last couple of years is the kind of proposed trail undercrossing from several years back sort of fell out of the project. But city staff, we are part of, as I mentioned, the overall project team with ODOT. And what we've been wanting to do is try to see if there is a possibility to get that back in here as the project moves forward. And so that's what I'm kind of here to talk to you a little bit about more today. So we can go to the next slide so I can tell you a little bit more about that. And so the image on here, before I get too much into it, just what that is it looks a little different than that previous one. That previous one was from 2014. This is much more up to date. It's about 7 years later. It's from this summer, and that will continue to change. That's why it has that subject to change in parentheses, very important. And that's due to really, in some ways, the way the state is delivering this project. They're using what's called design build, which many of you, especially counselors, you've probably heard of this. The city, we use this method as well for project delivery. It's a way to engage a design team and a construction team, contractors, to kind of take sort of what we call proof of concept or sort of an early kind of design, and then potentially make changes and improvements to that. So it has, as I mentioned, the design concept has changed over the one you saw previously. And although that trail crossing did come out due to some of that uncertainty over time, we are city staff trying to work to see if that's something we can work back into the project. So overall, if you are familiar with the area, which I'm sure many of you are, there's approximately 1.3 miles between Empire Avenue on the south, that interchange, and then where Cooley Road is on the north. And in that 1.3 miles today, there are no crossings of any kind for people to drive, walk, or bike across the railroad, which is currently through there. And then what would be the proposed new US 97 alignment that would be constructed through the Bend North Corridor project. So what we're planning to do, we're just getting started on right now, is a very sort of expedited study, a feasibility study, to look at a couple of crossing locations that we think are possible, possible locations, and see the feasibility of, getting a trail back into here and what that might entail from a cost and engineering perspective, to cross both the railroad that would be parallel to and the new US 97 alignment. So it's about $100,000 budget we have for that. And the dates would start very soon. We're finalizing the scope of that with the consultant right now. And we would need to sort of be done with that this upcoming spring to match up with the current procurement that the ODOT team is doing to select their design builder to carry on the project, to make sure that if we do reach a decision of the trail being feasible, the trail crossing being feasible, that it could be included in their overall contract and not interrupt the project timeline. And as I've shown with two kind of yellow circles on the map, going with the sort of final bullet here on this list, we're looking at two locations we think are probably have the best chance of evaluation. We needed to kind of limit that. These are two that have been talked about over time with city staff and a little bit with ODOT. One is it kind of on the north end here, north being to the right, the way this is oriented graphically, is it sort of Roble Lane, the sort of Roble Village shopping center that's been built up over the last few years, connecting to the Boyd Acres kind of neighborhood to the east. And the other is a little bit to the south, sort of Fred Meyers Road and Nels Anderson. We think that one has a little bit less viability, but we're just going to take a look at both just to be sure and do our diligence. And I'll tell you a little bit more about the details in the next slide. So I mentioned we're doing about $100,000 budget and study. The consultant that we'll be working with is WSP. And the reason that's relevant is because this is the consultant that has been intact with the Bend North Corridor project going back several years. They one of the benefits of working with them is that they have familiar with the project. They have worked on kind of the survey, the environmental phase. They've developed that kind of proof of concept that you saw on that previous slide. So there's a ability to not bring a new cook into the kitchen, so to speak, to try to get them up to speed on the project. So we've been, like I said, finalizing kind of scope with them, and they have quite a bit of experience on projects in all over the country and the world, really, working on things like this. And so, we're hopeful that'll be a big benefit to kind of working through this, as time is really of the essence to figure this out as ODOT is working through their procurement simultaneously for the design build team. And as I mentioned, the study, the things that we'll be looking at are design alternatives at these locations for what is possible to be constructed. The thing we think is most likely is some sort of an undercrossing of both the rail and the highway alignment. However, that really depends on the location and on what is ultimately possible there. It's always pretty tricky working with rail. We've had experience with that in several locations across town already with other projects. And so that's something we are going to try to determine as best we can, even at this early stage, to see what is feasible. And costs. Costs are very important to see what is the order of magnitude of something like this in terms of lower to higher dollar amounts. We won't get it to the nth degree, but possibly, is it something that is something we'd be able to budget for and move forward with. And this is really important, the second to last bullet there. This is definitely, I know, important to the overall project team, being led by ODOT, because it is something that kind of caused the trail crossing to drop out when the reevaluation was done, as I mentioned on the earlier slide. If we do find that this is feasible, both for the railroad and for the ODOT team, it's important that moving forward into final design and construction of whatever alternative could be selected, it needs to be fully funded to be added in. Like many projects all over the country, not just in the Central Oregon region, this project, the Bend North Corridor project, is facing budget pressures due to escalating costs for land, construction. It's a tough environment out there right now for infrastructure. I'm sure many of you have heard that, just like it is for many things. And so if we do determine that this could work from an engineering perspective and connect up the various neighborhoods around this, we would need to figure out if this is something we could fully fund. And so that's something we've been looking into. We've had some discussions already with the MPO staff, looking at the funding options. But of course, this study, not to put the cart before the horse, but the study is very important to determine what that cost might be and if it is feasible first. And a next step is that we can, as we get through the study over the winter, and we know a little bit more, we can come back and provide an update if that's something that would be desired to the MPO a little bit later further into the study. But that's where we're at right now. We're just at sort of the beginning of this, finalizing that scope, and we plan to get started very soon and hopefully have a little bit more information here in just a few months and wrap it up by the spring. That said, open it up now to answer any questions and take comments and feedback too for our effort.
Thank you, Rory. Looks like Rick has his hand up. Hi, Rick. You got a question?
Yeah, Barb, thank you. Rory,
Rick Williams.
I'm originally from that neighborhood and that neighborhood association up there in Boyd Acres. And I really appreciate trying to make the connection under the railroad and the new highway alignment. But if I remember correctly, there's really not a complete bike and pedestrian network to the east until you get over to about 18th Street. So will your study also address how this undercrossing would actually tie into a bike and ped network? Because those two locations right now don't have any bike or ped facilities remotely close to them.
That's a great question. And that is something city staff has been discussing. And hopefully everyone kind of heard that. I'll repeat a little bit of it. Just the question about the overall connectivity beyond the undercrossing itself, for especially the neighborhoods to the east and sort of the Boyd Acres area there. So yes, that is something we've been discussing. This particular study is pretty limited to, especially for the purposes of the Bend North Corridor and seeing whether or not the undercrossing is feasible and what it would cost to, especially the budget that we have to work with, the actual crossing at the Bend North Corridor alignment and the railroad. However, that you are right that connectivity today is pretty poor once you get into the east due to the development kind of patterns in the road network. So staff's been discussing that. There is a sort of key route identified within our transportation bond program that passed by the voters last November. So we've been looking at that as one funding option to put some additional improvements in there. And it's something that we will keep looking at, because you're right, putting a crossing in there and doing nothing else wouldn't be probably the best thing for the long term. We wouldn't want to just trade a short-term gain for nothing to connect that for, like you're right, from a planning perspective, how to provide actual connectivity for trips into there. So, but I think the big thing is we just didn't want to lose this ability to, as many of the counselors here are probably aware of, we recently had discussions about another city project into town of the Parkway. And I know you're probably very familiar with this, Rick, from the Parkway plan is our Midtown Crossings project. We didn't want to get into a situation where a generation from now, we're talking about having to do another one of those, but on the North Corridor, because we lost the opportunity at this time to build something in that would provide the connectivity for that. And so that was really the important part of looking at this now, but you're right, we don't want to lose that long-term vision of how to provide the additional connections in the neighborhood too. So it's something we're aware of and we're discussing.
Thank you.
Are there any other questions for Rory? So Rory, I heard a rumor that the railroad does not send trains over spots where construction is happening under a railroad, and that in order to construct this, there would have to be a way for the railroad to go around that construction. Is that true? Do you know?
Typically, yes, that would be, you would have to build a, what's basically a bypass track around since there's a single track in that area. If you were to use an underpass option at the existing rail, that is typically what you would have to do. But that said, since this is kind of an alternatives, I think we still have, I believe, is the slide still being shared? Looks like it is. I'm seeing it here. I've got my slide on another screen, so I'm making sure I'm looking at the right thing. So, we have here on the third bullet here on this last slide, we talk about, we're looking at design alternatives evaluation. One of the things we will look at there is both that option, as well as just depending on the location there, and what happens with the highway alignment at that location, and if it stays the same as it sort of is right now, if we will go over or under there, or if that's the best thing, because it's kind of a cost benefit sort of evaluation that we would need to do to determine if that's the best thing and how long of a bypass track you would need and what that cost would be. So that is something we've been discussing in the scope of the study that we would do there. So that's why it's kind of called alternatives evaluation, is not just alternatives of the two locations, but at a location, what are the different options we could do? And so you're right, typically that's something that they would require, but doesn't mean that's the way we would necessarily go without looking at the different options and weighing those.
Thank you. My concern has to do with that $100,000, which is real money. And it seems to me that if we were going to have to pay to reroute trains, it would be a pretty simple answer that no, we can't do that, and wouldn't take much of $100,000 to decide that it would be far too expensive to build a new railroad line in order to get around. So my point is just, it seems like that might be, unfortunately, that might be something that is ruled out fairly quickly, but then you have confirmed that even if that's ruled out, we'd still be looking into going over the railroad crossing at that point. Correct? Or not the railroad crossing, they'll be looking at going over.
And like I said, it's, over or a combination of, depending on what's going on with the, in this case, you have two, and it's very similar to the Midtown Crossings project I just mentioned in more of the core of Bend. You have the Parkway, you have the US 97 and the rail right next to each other. And so it's just seeing what's going on with both alignments there, if they're not at the same elevation or if one is higher and lower, and seeing what, that's what we'll be looking at and seeing, are you going over one and under the other? That's not something that happens often, but we will look at each option that's possible there before we rule anything kind of out and find out. It's, I call this sort of a feasibility study, but really it's a due diligence, because if ultimately we say it's not possible, it can't move forward for various funding reasons and constructability reasons, I think it's really having this here. So city staff and really counselors as well, being decision makers, you all have that too. If the community asks you and say, well, our staff did look at this, if it's years down the future and found this really wasn't possible, it was, going to be 20 million or something, and it wasn't a decision we could make, right, for the community, if that's where it comes to. But if it was possible, we at least have that information to know it could move forward and fund it.
Thank you. And so then, Bob, would you talk to us, please, about that future compatibility, that even so that there's a possibility that the study will say, yes, it's feasible, but it's going to cost more money than we have right now. How do we make sure that we, save room for it in order to construct it in the future? Can you talk to us about that, please?
Yeah, it's a very complicated conversation. I think some of you were around before, this North Corridor FEIS diagram that we saw in 2013 and 14. It really has over $300 million worth of improvements in the north end, including this trail undercrossing. And so our current project's 130 to 150. So a lot of elements weren't included, roundabout at OB, Riley and Empire, other trails, signal improvements in certain locations. The drawing is very complicated. And so whenever, we have a scope now because we applied for the grant, we're successful based on some conditions around congestion reduction and climate issues and things like that removing the two signals does. So that's why we're limited to the scope we are. But if we if we have additional funds or additional needs like this one, it probably would be measured against those other improvements with the city to see like, hey, we know we're short 10 million. If this costs 10 million, is it more worthwhile than a roundabout at OB Riley and Empire, the widening of Empire, other phase components that weren't included in that, or aren't included now in our project, but were listed as part of the North Corridor improvements originally. So we would have to balance that. But to Rory's point, we really can't do that until we know what this is. Certainly bike ped connectivity is important. Is it going to be more important than some other multimodal improvements up there? That's hard to tell. That's why getting a number to it. We have a number to most of the other improvements, but we just don't know about this one. And so before we could make those decisions, we really need this information and the location. And so I know that's a long answer, Barb, but the main point would be is once we have this, then it's, we would have this discussion around, well, we don't have the money. Where can we get it? What is our next priority? Is this the top one, or is it one of those other improvements? And so I think all along, we know there's a phase 2 of the North Corridor because there are a lot of improvements that need to be made, Empire in particular. And so would this fall to that, or would we be able to add it to our current project? That's really the balance of information. And with that, it's not just us, there's future development up in this area still. And so will that trigger other improvements? So it's just this moving dialogue about what the next best improvement would be if we have additional money. And certainly this is one of the top priorities. Whether it's the top one or not, we'll see after this analysis is done.
Thank you, Bob. That's very helpful. Are there any other questions, comments?
I have one, Barb.
Yeah, thanks, Tyler.
Just a question, I think about kind of phasing or scalability. If it's deemed, feasible long-term to go under both the new alignment and the railroad, but we don't have funding, fully do that as part of this upcoming process. Could you put a culvert under the new highway alignment and then just seal it off, gate it off for a year or 2 years or 5 years, whatever it is, until there's full funding available to deal with the next piece of it to go under the railroad and do that type of thing? Is that a real consideration or something that could happen as part of this process?
Yeah, I mean, that's probably the most realistic, but then the location matters and the question that Rick brought up too matters. And so that's the issue right now. We could put an undercrossing for, $1 million or less probably under the highway. We just don't know where that would go. And certainly we don't want to put it there and have it be 10 years before it's used, right? That lends itself to other issues as well. But yeah, certainly that's a fair phased approach that we'll look at.
Excellent, thank you. Greg Bryant. Greg is on our technical advisory committee. Greg, have you got a question or a comment?
Yeah, I've got a question. It's just sort of a comment, and I think I know what the answer is, but if the infrastructure bill in Washington is approved, how quickly can that money be used for something like this? Okay, thank you.
Yep. I'm happy.
I don't want to speak for ODOT, but I don't think it would affect the current trajectory or timeline of the North Corridor design and construction. So I don't think it would fill the, sort of existing hole of this project that's kind of moving into the, as I mentioned throughout this presentation, this is kind of underway in procurement for selecting the design builder and start construction in the next year. And this would, as we said, we're trying to be mindful of their schedule, hence the reason we're really trying to get a decision on where this would even be and what it would look like, what the particular crossing would be under, over, whatever, under and over and that sort of thing. So I don't know that even if, funding was to be approved anytime in the next year, that it would flow or we would even get it. Or I say we, I mean, really, we, the city ourselves doesn't necessarily receive federal funds and can handle it. So it would really be ODOT, but I just don't, and as Bob mentioned, there's many other pressing needs on that corridor. So I I don't know that it solves this in the near term, but it, like you said, over time, if it was a hybrid situation or phasing approach, and we got at least the portion underneath, if that's what happens, the new 97 alignment done, then maybe yes, over the long term, that would help with the rail crossing portion, because those do tend to be, in our experience, the more expensive, harder things to do. And so maybe that gets done sooner and actually gets done if we find out through the study that is harder and more expensive to do at the current time. So I don't know, hopefully that helps a little. I mean, it's really hard to sort of crystal ball that one.
Or let me jump in. I apologize. It's our mandate deadline today, and so I'm jumping HR meetings and this one as well. But the problem with the undercrossing, right, and as Tyler mentioned, the phased approach to the highway is probably the most realistic right now. If we got extra money, and we would be more than happy to do that, right? Or other elements. We're still looking to grow our pot of money and add other things. The problem becomes the railroad, to Barb's point as well. There is so much risk going under the railroad. It complicates the design build project. It probably adds a year or two to the time frame, and certainly realigning 97 and eliminating the two signals out there and reducing traffic accidents is our number one priority, and we don't want to delay that. And so it would probably end up being a phase 2 approach to the railroad part. Maybe we certainly don't want to dig up the highway twice, so we would be happy to do that now, but that's probably the more realistic approach, that it becomes a separate project if we do see an influx of federal dollars due to the passing of the infrastructure bill.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Bob. That's very helpful. Any other questions, comments? I don't see any more hands. All right, Rory, thank you so much. Thanks for coming to talk to us about this. We know it's very, very complicated, and we're here at the MPO are trying to keep in advance, do what we can to make sure things are happening the way they need to happen. So thank you for your time, Rory.
Yeah, thank you, Rory.
That leads us to item number 8, which is Transportation Safety Action Plan. And Tyler and Hobie will take us through this item.
Yeah, give me just a second. I need to pull up a different presentation here.
Sure.
Sorry, it's taking me just a minute here. All right. Are you seeing the presentation? Are you seeing the note slides?
We're not.
We're seeing you.
Oh, all right.
No, yeah, it's not sharing yet. You need to hit share screen again, and then choose the window you'd like. It should just be a second. There you go. It's getting there. Okay, so now flip it and you'll be ready to go. Thank you.
I'm not seeing it at all right now, so.
It's not in presentation mode, but we can see the PowerPoint.
Is it still just the notes kind of the,
Yeah, we can see the notes on the side and
one more try.
One more try. If you can find view options when you have that presentation up, when we can find it.
hey, there it is.
There it is. You got it.
Sorry, I have I have 3 screens open, and so I'm having trouble juggling between them.
Me too. Yeah, no problem.
So anyway, I'll jump in. We had our safety summit, obviously, a couple weeks ago or a week ago. We wanted to take a step back and talk to the board a little bit about just some of the safety planning work that we've done in the area in the pretty recent past. And so I will just jump right in. It's going to talk a little bit about our transportation safety action plan, some of the data that came out of that, some of the findings of that. And then towards the end, Hobie will talk to some more updated data, talk about that safety summit just a little bit, and we'll talk about next steps. And so back in, I think it was 2018, 2019, we secured some funding from the ODOT Safety Division to develop safety action plans for both the city of Bend and Chutes County. Those dollars or those plans, ODOT provided some funding, and then for the Bend piece of it, the MPO provided some funding, as did the city of Bend. And in Deschutes County, I believe the county provides some matching funds for their efforts as well. This just shows our study areas, and so said we did one for the city of Bend within the city urban growth boundary. And as part of the county effort, they not only looked at all of the unincorporated roadways within the county, but they also looked at the roadways within Sisters, Lapine, and Redmond. The plans, we took a really comprehensive approach to doing that safety work. And so, we looked at engineering issues, emergency medical services, enforcement, education. We had a pretty robust stakeholder process. It was a pretty technical process, but we had a project management team, and we utilized the MPO's technical advisory committee. And at that time, the citywide transportation advisory committee that was overseeing development or the update of the city's transportation system plan, we had them engaged as well. And then we had a multidisciplinary stakeholder group that included folks that we don't typically engage in these type of efforts, like the
District attorneys.
Yeah, district attorney's office, and who else?
Health services, health department, commute options, just kind of a broader scope of services within the community.
Yeah, and I'm just going to throw this in too. I think these projects, the cost, as planning efforts go, these were, as planning projects go, these were very low cost kind of projects. I think we did the City of Bend Safety Action Plan for about $80,000, which is pretty cheap. And I think it's probably one of the best planning documents that we've produced, in the last 5 years through some of our work, just in terms of looking at the whole spectrum of issues that are safety, because it's not just fixing a roadway. There's education, there's enforcement, there's behavioral issues, there's a whole lot of things. We try to pull all of those things into our process. And so we're not going to walk through all of what's in the safety action plans, but there's a lot of information in there. We had a consultant help us with some of the work, and they really dug in and looked at the data so that we could help figure out, where are crashes happening? What are the factors influencing those crashes? And then we use that information to help us determine how to move forward to address some of those issues. Systemic solutions, what it says up there, that's where you look at, I think for us, the thing I would point to on that one, especially, is within the county. We have a lot of, on the county roadway system, not only here, but throughout the state and throughout the US, on more rural roadways, you have a lot of run off the road crashes. It's a lot of times single vehicle crashes. There are things that you can do just kind of systemically across roadway systems. It's putting in curve warning signage, that type of thing. And so the documents identify, here's things you should be doing, on curves of, certain speeds, posted speeds should have this type of treatment. So that's something then that Deschutes County's doing. They're improving their curve signage, for instance, and utilizing some of their own funding, as well as seeking funding, grant funding from ODOT to do that type of thing. Speed when we dug into the data, speed is an issue in a lot of our crashes. And so there's a whole section of the plan devoted to speed management. We set aside a small part of the funding to actually look at some specific locations. And so within the document itself, there are, I think within Bend, we looked at 5 or 6 locations, and the consultant team dug in and looked at that data and said, well, here's some potential solutions at those sites or in those areas. And that information then, I think one of the interesting things about that is that fed into the GeoBond project list with some of that location specific information was specifically considered as part of the GeoBond project development. Section 6, non-infrastructure measures, that gets into the education and enforcement piece of it, because we know that probably a majority of our crashes cannot easily be addressed through changes to infrastructure. And then there's performance measures identified in both of these plans as well. Already talked to this, but data is really important part of the process, and it helps us determine how and where the types of crashes we're seeing and how we can address them. The plan when we put together at the time, the data we used was from 2012 to 2016. So these next couple of slides are going to just talk to the data from that time frame. We have some more current data, but I wanted to show you. I think there's some interesting information still with the data from that time frame.
Yeah, I just consider the trends are the same continuing forward.
Yeah, the trends and the locations, I don't think have changed.
Yeah, it's not a big change with the new data sets. We just haven't updated all of the tables yet.
And so the crash data from 2012 to 2016, you can see the summary here. There were 4,500 crashes just within the city of Bend. And we broke it out. So you can see there's 92 serious injury or fatal crashes. There were 112 bike crashes and 50 pedestrian crashes. And I think if you look at the data up there, particularly the pedestrian crashes, that ratio, there were 50 crashes, but 12 of them were either serious injury or fatalities. And so that's a population. We'll show you some data in just a minute. That's a population that pops up as an issue. Then it's like, if you're a pedestrian and you're hit by a car, there's a very high percentage. There's a pretty high % chance that you're going to be, injured or killed as part of that in that type of a crash. I'm going to pull up. There's a couple of slides here that just show you some of the data. This is a map. Each dot is a location of either a serious injury or fatal crash in Bend, and you can see they're scattered throughout the city. One thing that will shows up here and in a couple of future slides is the majority of those crashes are on our major roadways. So it's 3rd Street, Green Market Road, US 20, those type of facilities, which makes sense. I mean, those are the busiest roadways they have the most vehicles, and then from a bike and ped perspective, they're going to be the hardest to cross. This slide just shows the summary data from Deschutes County. And so during that time frame, there were a little over 3,000 crashes in Deschutes County. And I think one thing I would point out on the county data here is that the split on the bottom there shows county roads and state highways. It was almost an equal split between county roadways and the state highway system in terms of where those crashes occurred. And this map shows the locations of those serious injury and fatal crashes on the county roadway system. And you'll see here, I mean, we look at it, you'll see that the majority of those crashes are along major roadway systems, along US 97, US 20, Highway 126, and so on, and then some of the busier roads on the county roadway system. This map shows the locations of bicycle crashes in the city of Bend from that 2012 to 2016 timeframe. And again, it's pretty similar to the map I showed a couple of slides ago. The bike crashes primarily occur along our major roadways, which I think I would expect that to be the case. And there's a clustering along the 3rd Street corridor, especially along Greenwood that type of thing. This map shows pedestrian crashes and locations of those serious injury or fatal pedestrian crashes. And you can see again, there's a clustering, or there's a, they're along our major roadways, and there's a little bit of a clustering towards downtown, either downtown or on the periphery of downtown. This map shows pedestrian and bicycle crashes on the county roadway system. It's a little bit fuzzy, but you can see that bicycle pedestrian crashes are much lower issue on the county roadway system. I think that's because there's a lot less usage probably by those modes in the county roadway system. And you can see that a lot of those crashes are just on the periphery of Bend. There's a few on the periphery of Redmond and some down towards the Lapine and Sun River area. And I just kind of picked a few slides from, this is a presentation that we had given to the policy board, I think about 2 years ago. So I just wanted to pull, I just kept a few slides just to show you some of the things that are in these documents. This slide shows crashes on the county roadway system that included where alcohol or drugs were a factor. And I think the interesting thing here, the reason I wanted to show this one is that the gray bar shows that 12% of crashes involved the driver either had alcohol or drugs in their system. The red bar shows the percentage of crashes, fatal and serious injury crashes that involved alcohol. And so you can see that while there's 12% of crashes involve an intoxicated driver, 26% of our fatal and serious injury crashes included or involved an intoxicated driver. And so when there's alcohol involved, the potential for serious outcomes is much, much higher, if that makes sense. We looked at, as we dug into the data, we looked at a whole range of things. And so this slide shows, this is for City of Bend. One of the issues that popped up here was that young drivers are an issue in terms of their involvement in crashes in Bend. And so you can see that about 17% of crashes were by people under the ages of 25, but 29% of our fatal and incapacitating crashes involved that younger population. And so that's one of those things where we can look to. This is where you get into kind of the education outreach piece of us. How do we reach those younger drivers? Is it education outreach? Is it better driver's ed training? There's a lot of different things, but you use this kind of information then to determine how do we go about addressing that to help reduce that issue in the future. And so the plans identify emphasis areas based on reviewing all of that crash data. What are the issues that we need to be looking at? And so in Bend, roadway lighting conditions popped up as something. And that was something I don't think going into it, we weren't expecting that to come up as an issue. And we found that particularly for pedestrians at nighttime, poor roadway lighting is an issue. And that popped up. And that has since then helped, that information has helped the City of Bend as they've applied for some state grant funding to improve lighting on some of our more heavily, traveled pedestrian corridors. Yeah. Snow and ice, which I don't think is surprising. I didn't show the slide, but there's always a big uptick in the number of crashes, as winter approaches. The one good thing is there's a big uptick in the total number of crashes, but there's very few severe crashes typically. And I think people tend to slow down. It's just a matter of they're sliding into other cars, that type of thing. And then intersection crashes popped up as an issue, and that's an issue in every urban area in the country probably. Behavioral issues, the two biggies that popped up for us were speeding and then impaired driving. And then vulnerable users, I didn't show it, but it's an issue not only locally, but statewide. Motorcyclists are involved in when a motorcyclist crashes, there's almost always bad outcomes. And so while the total number of motorcycle crashes is not really high, the percentage of people in motorcycle crashes that are severely injured or killed is extremely high. And that's an issue that popped up on the county side of things as well. I think the next slide shows some of those emphasis areas in Deschutes County. And so same thing, light conditions popped up as an issue, snow and ice, roadway departure crashes. That's those kind of run off the road crashes that are much more common in unincorporated or rural areas. Behavioral issues, so that's speeding and drug and alcohol use again. And then the thing that popped up on their data on the vulnerable users, it was different from the Bend analysis, was older drivers. There's a much higher percentage of issue with older drivers crashing on the rural roadway system. So, Hobie, do you want to walk through the next few slides?
Happy to. Yeah.
And I will just say time check, maybe
Time check.
5 more minutes on this press. Is that right?
I can do this in 5 minutes.
There we go.
Do
Thank
this
you.
in 3 notes. Okay, remember
Thanks.
that? So with our new data, we looked at fatal crashes only just for the most recent years, just because data was hard to get. But in 2020, we had the highest fatalities ever in our record. So what we did is we really wanted to get an education campaign out there. We wanted to use existing education programs and that sort of thing. Commute Options has the organ friendly driver. There's other things that are out in our community right now, and we want to be able to bring those to the top and talk about safety culture. So updated crash data shows more fatalities this is all of Deschutes County. And then in the next slide, it just talks about the different counties. Because we're identifying this group as Central Oregon, we wanted to bring in Crook and Jefferson County data just because everybody in the Tri-County area, it has the same behaviors and same media outlets. So when we're going to share a message, we might as well share it with all 3 counties. So that's why this data is in here. And you'll see the update, 2015 to 2019 data. That's the most recent data I have available through ODOT. So we're always on a little bit of a lag, but we can still show some trends, and that's really important for programs. So on the next slide, you'll see the bike and pedestrian and motorcycle vulnerable user crashes here by percent. So it still is very prevalent. You know, motorcycles are higher in Crook County than they are in the other 2 counties, but in Deschutes County, typically and really in Bend, are the bike and pedestrian crashes, with some in more of the urban areas is where we get the most impact for bicycle and pedestrian. So you'll see some maybe in Redmond as well. So just a quick overview, but these slides are also available online too, and we'll share them out. On the next slide, we show the virtual summit that we had in September, and we had 60 people attend, a lot of elected officials from Deschutes County, Bend, Redmond, and the Central Oregon Area Commission on Transportation, as well as our Jefferson and Crook County groups, and then 12 presenters with a lot of emphasis on infrastructure. And then we talked about Clackamas County's education piece and how they were working on things. And while we didn't present, but Commute Options is also doing education pieces as far as that, what I mentioned, the organ friendly driver. And then they are reaching out to all of the younger drivers. When they do a driver's education, they have a training that they use there. So we are incorporating some of these non-infrastructure emphasis areas already, but more to come with this new grant funding that you just approved on our budget earlier in this meeting. So this virtual summit, if you weren't able to attend, is recorded and online. And on the next slide, you should be able to see the link, centraloregonsafetravel.org. And also wanted to talk about this survey. 1,900 people responded to our survey. Over 1,500 of them wrote out a comment of what they think or what their response is to transportation safety. That is not typical of surveys. So everyone is very passionate about transportation safety, and it impacts everyone. So the more we can create a culture of safe travels within Central Oregon, the better off we are. So we're going to build off of this momentum and continue on to our next one. The survey results are also online at that centraloregonsafetravels.org. So please check into that. And if you have any comments or questions, I'm happy to be here to answer any of those. The next slide is our next steps and what we're going to work on. We're going to group up with our project management team that we worked with, expand that, find some ways to incorporate the existing education pieces like I mentioned from Commute Options and others. We may go to a city club in a couple months to talk about safety and transportation. And then also just continue working through the grant project. We'll have the messaging campaigns and working with our partners. And the most important one that I feel is finding a stable funding source to continue working through these programs. So we're not stopping and starting as grants come through. So that'll be something you'll see us go to all of our partners. And I think there's one more slide maybe on, the COACT, the Central Oregon Area Commission on Transportation. That includes all 3 counties that we had mentioned. It has a lot of elected officials. We're hoping to create a subgroup of that committee to start implementing all of these projects. So that's where we will house a regional safety committee so that we can really spread the word. And there will be a lot more to come on that. And regularly reviewing and updating crash data for you so you can stay on top of that as well. And just remember those 4 steps to help be safer: slow down, drive sober, buckle up, and pay attention. We'll be saying that a lot. So just get that one in your repertoire. And let's see, I think there's maybe one more slide. Yeah, so just updates to the policy board, quarterly, biannually, can't talk, as new data is updated. So annual data, we usually get crash data from ODOT about 18 months after the year is over. Fatal crashes, which I can summarize for you, can be done quarterly. Those kind of things are something I can share. Other topics are just diving into different crash trends, different education opportunities, emphasis areas, those kind of things. So really just looking for your feedback as the policy board on how frequently I should be talking about transportation safety with you.
All right. Thank you, Hamby.
Thank you.
I think in the interest of time, we should probably keep moving. I'll stop sharing that screen.
Back to the other one.
Yeah.
So Barb, you can go ahead and start with public notice and that sort of thing. And then I've got a couple more things to talk about. I'll be quick though.
Okay.
Sorry.
No, it's okay.
Take over.
No, that's all right. Thank you so much. We've got just a minute. If anyone, Hovey, go ahead. You go ahead and just keep, if there's something
I don't see anybody with their hands up. So no other business. So what I've got are just 2 informational items. One is, I asked you to have approvals to our transportation improvement program. This is just a notification, but it's kind of a big one. So I just wanted to share it really quickly. When we go to the next slide, you can see that North Corridor project that we all talk about is doing some things. We are combining 2 approved projects into the North Corridor project, and we're changing the name of the project. Both of these are administrative amendments, but I wanted to just keep everybody on track. So in the next screen, you'll see how I visually put those together. So there's 3 projects here. It used to be called US 97 and Cooley Road midterm improvements. And now it's called US 97 and US 20 Bend North Corridor. No change to funding of that project. And then the other two projects are a variable messaging system in Region 4, which is the message boards that either change speeds or tell you that there's an incident or snow. And also the US 20 Sisters Interchange Bridge, which is the Sisters loop that goes right by Trader Joe's. Those two projects are getting combined in with the North Corridor project. So just giving you a updated total with those three projects in it, but no change to the scope of those projects. So I was just it's kind of a learning piece for the MTIP and how we do administrative changes versus full changes. So there's an administrative amendment example for you. And then next exciting news is I have 2 openings for the MPO budget committee. We are accepting applications as of today. I'm going to send out a news release later, but it's typically a once a year meeting at lunch. And when it was pre-COVID, I would feed you, but I'm not sure we will do that yet. But you'll see a news release go out. Please send that out to anyone you think would be appropriate for this group. That's all I have. Thank you.
Thank you, Hovey. I still have my eyes open for any hands. Anybody, comments, concerns? I don't see any.
I don't see any.
I'm sorry. Yep.
Okay.
Our next meeting is scheduled for November 16th from noon to 1:30. And I will say that we are adjourned. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a good afternoon.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.